I don't appreciate anything masculine on a woman at all, period. I don't think that men should have any feminine energy at all. What we have to understand is that men and women both nurture. We just do it in a masculine way. My nurturing is providing. That's masculine. Women nurture in their way. And even if I'm caring for a child, that's still masculine. That's not feminine energy. We can't mix the two up. Anybody who's in his true masculine is not going to have any feminine traits. So we can't misconstrue a lot of these ideas about someone caring for a woman or his child as being feminine. That's not feminine energy. That's still masculine. You're supposed to. That's how you are with your family. That doesn't make you feminine. Feminine energy is when you start to become emotional and can't control your emotions. That's another thing. There also, in my opinion, is a balance, right? And some women who are masculine will try to tone a man down so they can have that balance, because you do need a balance, and sometimes dysfunction is function. So if a woman is feminine, if she is masculine, then she can get with the guy who can listen to her and then just go and let her call the shots because he's feminine, which to me that would always be dysfunction. But I've seen it work. If you have a weak man, then he can get with a stronger woman. And that's why women who are masculine will try to attach buzzwords like toxic to masculinity, because they want to soften a man and make him weak so they can deal with him without compromising their own masculinity.
Well,
I have
actually,
a question.
Go ahead.
I have a question. I saw a video of a family. It was a mom and dad and a son. And the son had placed, I believe, third in a spelling bee over all these children. And he was crying because he lost. His father was crying because his son achieved, he was third place. He didn't win first place, but I think he was emotional because his son was emotional. Now the mom comes around, goes, y'all both crying. She's laughing at them. She's like, y'all both crying? Why y'all crying? And then she tells the boy, she's more masculine than the man at this point. But she's like, you achieved such a great, achievement, and you should be proud of yourself. And she's like, why are you crying? Asking the dad, like, why are you crying? So in that moment, what would you call that?
Do you want to call that feminine? I mean, it's
No, I'm
part
asking
of our
you. I'm
nature. It
not
is what
calling
it
it anything.
no.
Call that what
I'm
the
saying
dude
that's
doing or
just
the mama's doing?
The man was
that
crying
doesn't take
out
away
of
that doesn't take
joy.
away from your masculinity. That doesn't take away
What'd you say?
from your masculinity. It's what you do with it. Like you just sitting there crying. It is what it is. You feel you. It doesn't mean that we don't feel emotions at all. It's what we
Mm-hmm.
do with our emotions, right? When we start doing things that are out of order, when we start doing things that are out of control, that's when you're exhibiting feminine behavior. When you start
Mm.
to do things that are going to give you consequences, when you have to suffer consequences because of it, but for yourself or others, that's when you start becoming feminine, right? You can still remain stoic. You're good. Crying, it is what it is. Now, if you cry like, oh no, I lost my job, and what am I going to do? That's different.
Right.
As a man, you know what you got to do. You got to get back on a horse and get busy. But feeling emotions for your child is in no way feminine, in my opinion.
Yeah,
okay,
when I met my dad for the first time, I cried like what, on and off, like what, 3 different times. When my cousin first called me, I cried. When I went out to Philly, I cried when I was at the hotel, and then when I got home, it was the time I cried. So yeah, like crying isn't feminine. Crying is like taking a shit, like it's letting something go, you know.
A lot
And
of people don't
men,
do it though. You'd be
yeah,
surprised.
some men actually try to hold it in, but that's a toxic issue. But because if you hold anything in, that actually causes toxicity, right? So crying itself isn't feminine. But when a man cries because he can't do something about something, now that's a problem. That's a feminine issue because he's frustrated because he can't do something. If you lose a game, you can cry. But if you cry in the middle of the game because you're losing, now that's a different story because you still got an opportunity to win. So why the hell you crying?
actually, just to kind of jump in here, when you talk about masculinity and femininity, do men and women need a balance of both? No. The actual regular standard male, that nothing's wrong with him, has over 70% of masculinity in him. And the actual standard female has over 70% of femininity in her. But I think a lot of times when we talk about masculinity and femininity, we're associating it with gender behavior. And that's the issue, because masculinity by definition is defined as doing. So if you're saying that you don't want masculinity in a woman, technically I would dispute that, because a lot of men want that woman to be active. You want her to work out. That's masculinity. But when you're talking about emotions, that actually is femininity. If femininity is described as nurturing, comparing, compassion, things like that, that's literally in the definition. I'm not making this up. So when you're saying crying, crying is an emotion, crying is femininity. When you're saying anger, anger is an emotion, anger is femininity. So emotion, empathy is described under the umbrella of femininity. But again, it is how you channel it, because a person who is utilizing that emotion and then they start acting on it. For instance, anger. Once you start becoming physical, now you transition that into masculinity. And so I think when we have this conversation, we try to identify it with a gender, because femininity is associated with female, and then masculinity is associated with male, and we have perpetuated ideas of what a masculine man look like. And 50 Cent and Taye Diggs are both heterosexual black men, but you get two different ideas of masculinity with them. Two completely different ideas. So
yeah, Taye Diggs especially is fruity as hell. Yeah, I agree.
He's a heterosexual black man. So regardless of
fruity.
the fact that you may not like how he handles himself or carries himself well, or if you look at the character that played Kyle on Living Single versus the character that played Overton, those are two heterosexual black men, but people would assume that Kyle had a lot more femininity in him than Overton did, but neither one of those men necessarily lacked masculinity. So I think in this conversation that we take these ideas and we apply them and try to denote them down to gender roles, when in actuality, I don't need a balance of masculinity in order to act in my femininity or my womanhood. At times, I do need to exude masculinity due to whatever situational scenario. However, I always want to encompass femininity, because that is who I am at my nature, at my core.
Hey, what is living single? I'm a millennial, so I don't know. What is that?
That was a show we had
That
Queen
was back in your time. What you talking about?
Bullshit, man.
Yeah, I know he's joking.
I'm a millennial. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm too young to
You old. Stop.
Hey, go ahead, Lady Di.
I was gonna ask Paris 2 questions. So you said working out is masculine. Can you explain that? And then the second question is, you said about I lost. Hold on, I forgot. But can you explain the workout part? You said that's masculine.
The act of masculinity is doing. So lifting, physical fitness, those things are characterized as masculinity, because anytime you're actually acting, anytime you're in some type of physicality that could be seen as dominance or aggression, that would be considered masculinity.
So then that means women shouldn't play sports then?
No,
right?
I didn't say that. I said I would counteract men saying that they don't want a woman to behave masculine, but a lot of men like their women to be physically fit and shape. It actually shows that if a woman is physically fit and shape, her child has greater chances of being active, and it actually helps increase children being more athletic and more healthy if a woman is active as opposed to the father. So I'm just saying that when we're saying women shouldn't act masculine or men shouldn't act feminine, empathy is a feeling of femininity. I do want a man to be feminine. I do want a man to be nurturing. That is a feeling of femininity that is under the umbrella. We can't make men nurturers and then call it masculinity, because by definition it don't apply. You're acting in feminine. I just don't want you to have more femininity than me, or I don't need it balanced. I need you to have the normal standard of what is automatically applied in a biological male. That's it.
I get that point, but I'm trying to get.
I don't think she's saying don't work out though. I don't think she's saying that.
Nurturing is So nurturing for a man is still in his masculinity. It's just he's doing it in his masculinity. It's not that he's feminine.
By definition, that's not true.
But
see, that's what I'm saying. This definition, I feel like that's why so many men now need therapy, because I'm thinking about our boys now, how they suppress these things because they don't feel like, oh, if I express this to my dad, he might think so I just feel like a lot with this definition, a lot of men now today, it didn't work. Them suppressing these things didn't work. That's why we talking about half of these things now, because I don't feel like that's feminine. I still feel like that's masculine. I still feel like a man expressing himself is masculine.
Communication has no energy, right? So communication is not necessarily masculine or feminine. When you're talking about feminine energy, and I'm saying nurturing is under the umbrella of feminine energy. The natural man, the regular standard biological male, has 30% or less feminine energy. You can look it up.
So you saying like a single dad, like a widow, like a widow dad. He had to get
okay. So let me
energy to.
Hold on, y'all. We got to get Chanel in there. We got to get Chanel in there before we start going back around for the second time. Let's get Chanel in there.
I don't mind hearing the rest of their conversation.
I got you, Ali.
I don't mind hearing the rest of their conversation, but I'm just gonna add passiveness is normally linked with feminine energy, and being direct is normally linked with masculine energy. I think both passivity and being direct can be applied in different situations, and I think we're all reasonable enough to know which situations we can use both things in. We don't have to overcomplicate these things. We can use what's been happening many years ago to see what femininity is and to see what masculinity is. I do agree with Paris. There's 30% estrogen in men and there's 30% testosterone in women. So it's already balanced within our own bodies just as much as we need. So that's just my opinion.
So technically, is eating ass masculine or feminine?
Masculine. You're doing something.
Would you just take these things seriously? These are great conversations we can have. Please.
I just want to ask a question. Go ahead, Ali.